The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim hits theaters this weekend, which means that the horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep one last time. One last time. This video is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. Go to theperfectgene.nyc and use code DAN15 for a special offer, and stay tuned after the video for more info. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, which hits theaters this weekend. The review embargo just dropped, and this is a continuation of sorts of Peter Jackson's Middle-earth universe. There is a carryover as far as location and creature design from the live-action films, but it's done in a 2D anime style. The director of the film is Kenji Kamiyama, who's branched into directing spin-off Hollywood projects in the last few years like this, Blade Runner, Black Lotus, and Star Wars Visions. War of the Rohirrim takes place nearly 2 centuries before the Lord of the Rings films, during the rule of Rohan's king Helm Hammerhand, for which Helm's Deep would later be named. Rohan finds itself under attack from a conquering army and must fight back to ensure the kingdom's survival, and much of the movie covers the riders of Rohan as they fight for control of the Rittermark. But the main character of the War of the Rohirrim is not King Helm Hammerhand. He does play a large part in the movie. Instead, using some vague wording in the original appendix from which the story is drawn, the movie centers around Hera, daughter of Helm, voiced by Gaia Wise, as the main protagonist. And the movie's writers, anticipating the lore and Middle-earth history experts who might be stirred by this decision, present this movie as the story you may not have heard, as something that has long been lost to legend, which allows them to technically remain true to the lore and not violate anything that we already know, but also introduce this new character. Honestly, I think that's as good a way as any of threading that needle between sticking to what's known and bringing in something new. I don't know if that's going to placate the folks that would come after this for historical, even though this isn't real history, inaccuracy, but at least it's a good try. It's been 10 years since we last saw a Middle-earth movie. Of course, Amazon has their own show that's now run for 2 seasons. And I think that animation is a smart idea as far as doing continuity, strict continuity as far as design and everything else with Peter Jackson's movies. Because if you're going to go live action and you're going to do it in Rohan, then this is a lot easier than trekking all the way back up to Mount Sunday in New Zealand and rebuilding the Golden Hall from scratch, or replacing it with CGI that people would almost assuredly complain about. But I also think that any return to Middle-earth should feel epic, like an event. And the War of the Rohirrim, while often impressive in its scale, doesn't really feel like that big of an event. Part of it may be that we know how it ends. I mean, a movie that is about the survival of Rohan and whether or not the kingdom will live on is kind of anticlimactic when you know, because you've seen the other movies, that the kingdom of Rohan will live on. And yes, you could definitely say the same thing about the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies as far as people that have read the books knowing how it's going to end. But I think the difference here is that the stakes were still massive. The conflicts in those movies involved the entirety of Middle-earth. What we're seeing here is pretty much a regional conflict in Middle-earth. While I respect the decision to center the film around Hera, I also didn't find her to be the most compelling lead character. She's a great warrior and a loyal daughter and leader, but nothing about her really jumped off the page or the screen for me on a personal level. And I absolutely understand the desire to center a Middle-earth movie around a female character. And I think that Hera will probably win over a lot of fans. A lot of people are going to love her in this film, and that's fine. I just wish that she had been written as three-dimensionally as not just the male characters, but a lot of the female characters in the Lord of the Rings films. For example, Eowyn. I didn't really feel the same depth of character from her as we saw from Miranda Otto's character in the original movies. And when you break it down, War of the Rohirrim is essentially introducing a new character as the lead of the movie. I just wish that she'd been as memorable as so many of the others that we've met in live action. The animation in the film is solid, often beautiful, but rarely what I would call spectacular. I love Kamiyama's style, and I wish that the film had been given more time in production to really embrace the possibilities that anime provides. War of the Rohirrim was fast-tracked into production reportedly so that New Line could keep the movie rights to Lord of the Rings and they wouldn't revert back to the original owners. And when you hear those two words, animation and fast track, honestly, this is far from the worst case scenario. This could have felt much, much worse or much, much more cheap than it does. It doesn't feel cheap and it doesn't look bad. It just doesn't feel as stunning as I think it could have been if it had had the full development and production cycle to really put everything they had into it. Honestly, this wouldn't have felt completely out of place if it had premiered on Max as a streaming movie instead of in theaters. And when we're talking about Lord of the Rings, it really shouldn't even be a competition. It should be a movie that demands to be seen on a big screen. I'm sure that War of the Rohirrim will look great on a big screen, but I don't think it's one of those movies that says you absolutely must run to the theater and see it right away. Of all the franchises and intellectual properties, Lord of the Rings has always been the toughest on creators, who are often constrained by what they can use and what they can't use. They're basing entire movies like this and entire shows like Amazon's off of stuff that's in the appendices and where they can kind of doodle around in the margins. So it's a difficult task to begin with, but I think you add to that the films, especially ones that are taking place in the same universe as Peter Jackson's original movies, have such a high standard to meet because the original trilogy was so good that even a good follow-up is going to pale in comparison. I think that the Hobbit movies suffered from this. I didn't think that the Hobbit movies were terrible. It's just that they weren't able to approach the greatness of what had come before. In an effort to get butts in seats, the marketing for War of the Rohirrim has amped up the connection between this movie and the original movies, which is a comparison that I don't think does this movie, or honestly would do any movie, a whole lot of favors. The trailers also tease some connections to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they are brief and they feel entirely forced. If you're walking in thinking this is going to be some piece of vital connective tissue or hoping for a bunch of Easter eggs or returning characters, then I think you're going to be mostly disappointed. In a vacuum, The War of the Rohirrim is a perfectly fine animated film that capitalizes on the amazing design and aesthetic that already exists, with some strong vocal performances, some nice looking visuals, especially when you take things as individual shots, and a few exciting action sequences. As a Lord of the Rings film, though, I worry that this is going to leave some fans disappointed or maybe underwhelmed because it just can't rise to that level. Now, this is the first of several potentially spin-off Lord of the Rings movies coming down the pipeline because, we live in a hellscape, and you can't stop that from happening. Warner Brothers and New Line and everybody else were going to exploit this intellectual property as much as they possibly could at some point. My hope for the future isn't necessarily that they don't make these movies. It's that the ones that we get later on are maybe a little bit more well-rounded, that aren't quite as reliant on our love for the previous films, and that maybe can blaze their own trail as legally, permissibly as they can through the Tolkien lore. I think that you can make great Lord of the Rings spin-off films, just like I think you can make great spin-off Star Wars films, but there's also a reason why those are often few and far between. So while this one may have left me a little underwhelmed, I do have hope for the future that they might be able to recapture just a little bit more of that magic. So when we're looking at my ranking on my own personal scale, despite my admiration for the work and the art of this movie, I can only put it as far as it's fine because the story just didn't quite grab me. If you're a hardcore Lord of the Rings fan, I'm sure you're probably going to head out and see it. I would temper the expectations just a little bit. If you're looking to get introduced to the world, I would say just watch the original movies again and catch this one when it's on Max or wherever streaming later on, because I don't think that this is a must-see. So those are my thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. What do you think? Are you going to be heading back to Middle-earth this weekend? Let me know down in the comments below. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor for this review. This video is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. Christmas is fast approaching and your schedule is probably packed. Holiday get-togethers, last-minute shopping, trekking out to find that perfect tree. Well, there's one pair of jeans that's perfect for all of your holiday activities, and it's The Perfect Gene. The Perfect Gene is stretchy enough to accommodate any number of holiday feasts, comfy enough to wear watching Christmas Vacation on the couch for the 12th time, and cozy enough that it's like your legs are constantly resting next to a warm fireplace. And they come in 6 fits for all occasions, with waists from 26 to 50 and lengths from 26 to 38. So whether you're Santa-sized or elf-sized, they have what you need. Not only do I still love wearing my own pair, I'm checking my own Christmas list to see who would be perfect to have a pair of their own, and there will be some perfect jeans under the tree for a couple of people who I won't name because they might be watching. Plus, the Perfect Jean offers free shipping, exchanges, and returns, making my order risk-free just in case I don't have those sizes quite right. It's finally time to stop putting up with uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectjean.nyc. Our viewers and listeners get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code DAN15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with promo code DAN15. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them, so please support the show and tell them that I sent you. F your khakis and get the Perfect Jean. Thanks to The Perfect Jean for sponsoring this review, and thank you for watching. Be sure to stay tuned right here. I've got a very busy week of more reviews, box office, movie news, and more. Be sure to check out the video I put up earlier this morning breaking down the Golden Globe nominations, and there's going to be a lot more stuff like that to come. Until then, though, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.